Now we're going to switch over and speak to Mr. Joe Quinn. He is the senior editor and political analyst at SOTT.net.
Trendstorm.
Okay, Joe, how disruptive of a force has Trump been thus far to the liberal world order that he inherited, and how does his recently assertive attitude towards the World Trade Organization figure into his global strategy?
Well, I mean, there doesn't seem to be any doubt that Trump is a direct threat to the so-called liberal world order. I mean, the liberal world order, as it's called, is essentially the Western-dominated world order, which is, I suppose, been dominated since at least the Second World War by the US, and certainly for centuries before that by the British and some European powers. So it's really a US-centered world order, a Pax Americana enforced militarily and economically. So America is obviously a global empire, but the problem is that history shows that all empires inevitably run into problems of, overreach, mismanagement, discontent, I suppose, among subjects and I suppose the natural progress of history. The question that occurs to me is Trump aware of this? Certainly, he's repeatedly lamented the unfair nature of global free trade under the WTO and the whole most favored nation rule, which is basically equal economic rights for all signatories. But it strikes me that the US's real problem is its imperial role as a global protector and arbiter, under which it has, obviously, as most people know, been forced to spend vast amounts of money on the maintenance of that empire, including all types of aid and different payments to dozens of countries. At the same time, the global free trade and the opening up of foreign markets to US culture and products was supposed to consolidate US imperial rule. But that's obviously a two-way street, because the US had to open its large captive market to the world as well. I mean, after all, if you spend so much time and effort in getting access to and controlling foreign markets, why not buy everything you need from them? And the result is, as Trump repeatedly complains about, American manufacturing and jobs have suffered, and it runs a large trade deficit. So this is what Trump wants to correct, but it's obvious that he can't do that without dismantling, to some extent anyway, the former global order where America acted as a protector and arbiter of all, But apparently he's committed to doing so, and we have to remember that this is occurring, all of this is occurring in the context of major changes in the global power balance as well, with the rise of Russia and China and other major Eurasian nations. So what I'm wondering is it the case that not only does Trump's semi-isolationist approach to world trade make economic sense for the USA, but that he also sees the writing on the wall from a geopolitical perspective, i.e. that basically the US is no longer viable, or the US as an empire is no longer viable anyway.
Okay, this is very interesting. You brought up China and the changing global power balance. So what I'm wondering is the degree of importance that the competition between the economic models of Chinese-led liberalism and American pioneer protectionism will have on the overall dynamics of what some are calling the new Cold War, or what you described as the changing global power balance.
Well, I mean, that competition and the economic and political reality of the major shift in the global power balance seems to be speeding up the playing out of that so-called new Cold War, because, I mean, it's facilitating the dismantling of that old Western-dominated order, right? And I mean, the new Cold War isn't really a new Cold War. I mean, instead, it's more like a reaction by imperially minded elements in the US and also in the UK to some extent, I suppose the so-called deep state. It's their efforts to try and maintain the Western-dominated order in the face of rapid changes in the global balance of power. And as I mentioned earlier, the rise of Eurasia. I mean, these deep state types simply don't know what to do about that, and they seem to be lashing out in all directions. And that's totally aside from Trump's action. In fact, it's obvious that those elements, deep state elements, let's say, see Trump as a major threat to their hegemony and their worldview. Hence the Russia collusion nonsense and the encouragement, certainly by the Western press, to see Trump as a dictator in waiting.
Okay, Joe, well, you describe many of the different strategic layers at play here. So how likely is it that the geostrategic consequences of what we can overall generalize as the dismantling of the old Western-dominated order, as you described it, reshape key international partnerships that had hitherto been taken for granted, such as that between the U.S. and the EU? And finally, Joe, what could the ramifications of such shifts be for the new global order that Trump is trying to build?
Well, I mean, we're seeing long-standing international partnerships, at least in terms of the Western-dominated global order, already fraying at the edges. With the threat of U.S. Tariffs that most people know about on the EU and Canada, and there's no sign that Trump is going to back down on that. We still have to wait and see where it goes. But there's obviously he doesn't seem to be backing down. He's in it for the long haul. So we can probably expect to see those relationships sour even more, and we can probably expect to see the breaking of other economic friendships, and as a result, political friendships being broken as well. As for his new global order, he seems to be completely fine with the idea of a kind of every man for himself approach to global trade, and he believes that America can hold its own in a kind of hard bargaining approach to global trade. But as I was mentioned previously, there's still this problem of America's imperial responsibilities and exposure, because it is an empire, and because of its history, the American economy is heavily invested in and dependent really on much of the rest of the world's governments not becoming at least overtly hostile towards the US. But by doing what he's doing, by kind of unceremoniously disenfranchising, or I suppose you could say kicking the kids of empire out of the house and giving them economic problems in the process, he's very likely going to anger a lot of them. And if there's one thing I know for sure, it's that in politics, money trumps ideology every time. And if Trump's vision ultimately boils down to a relatively peaceful and safe dismantling of much of the economic and, by implication, military infrastructure of the empire, then for me, it's not at all clear that he can do that. I mean, if we look to the past, the only historical reference for the end of a major world empire that we have any kind of data on or fairly detailed understanding of is the Roman Empire. And I mean, that didn't go so well, not just in terms of the chaos involved in the actual collapse, but also the several hundred years of dark ages that ensued. So I suppose the question I'm asking myself anyway is, should we be preparing ourselves for repeat performance?
Joe, this is an interesting chat that put Trump's World Trade Organization moves into their proper perspective by explaining the impact that they could have on the global order. I really enjoyed your contribution to our program. It was very valuable. Thanks again.
Trendstorm.